If you think you can control it, think again. Ethan muttered under his breath as he stumbled across the shifting sands of the alien desert, the red-orange horizon stretching endlessly before him. The shuttle had broken apart on impact, sending twisted metal and gear into the wind like scattered toys. He checked his wrist display, 78 degrees Fahrenheit, wind gusts at 45 miles per hour, sand particles biting through the thin layers of his flight suit. Each step sank 2 inches into the loose desert crust, the crunch of debris under his boots mingling with the distant howl of something massive moving beyond the dunes. His eyes flicked to the shifting shadows, every flicker of movement tightening the knot in his stomach. The predator's presence was unmistakable, enormous, sleek, and entirely unrestrained by the terrain, its scaled back glinting under the twin suns as it patrolled the ridge. Ethan crouched behind a jagged rock outcropping, the heat radiating off it making his fingertips tingle, and adjusted the pack on his shoulders, pulling out a compact feeding device from the side pouch. A faint scent of ammonia mixed with ozone filled the air, stinging his nostrils, and he realized the creature's sweat glands emitted pheromones that carried over hundreds of feet. From the ridge above, a flash of iridescent green skin caught his attention. Lyra, the alien observer, hovered slightly above the ground, her long limbs folded in measured patience, her eyes reflecting the light like polished emeralds. "You shouldn't be here," she called, her voice a melodic chime carried by the wind, yet calm enough not to startle the predator. Ethan raised a hand in acknowledgement, keeping his body low and movements deliberate. "I'm not here to hurt it," he said, his tone steady, eyes scanning the beast as it circled closer, its amber eyes tracking him with curious intelligence rather than aggression. He knelt, adjusting the small amount of nutrient gel in the feeding tray, and extended it slowly toward the predator, careful to let it see his hands empty and non-threatening. The creature paused, nostrils flaring, and a low, resonant growl vibrated through the air, sand shifting beneath its massive claws. Lyra's tail flicked in surprise, ears swiveling in disbelief, yet she didn't intervene, observing as Ethan mirrored the predator's breathing rhythm, slow and measured, matching its cadence without hesitation. Dust swirled around them, painting the scene in shades of copper and crimson, and for a long moment, predator and human regarded each other, neither moving but fully present, the silence thick with anticipation. Ethan's heart beat steadily, counting each pulse as if it were a mantra, and he whispered softly, almost to himself, "It's not fear I want. It's trust." The beast tilted its head, muscles shifting beneath sleek scales, and in that tilt, there was a flicker of recognition. Lyra's eyes widened, golden orbs reflecting the desert suns, and she whispered, He might actually be able to do it." Wind whipped sand across Ethan's shoulders, clattering against metal fragments scattered across the dune. He reached out, palm open, a universal gesture of peace, and the predator inched closer, sniffing the air, evaluating the intention of this small, white-skinned human who dared approach with nothing but patience and presence. Ethan felt the warmth of its gaze and the raw weight of its mass in the anticipation radiating from each movement. "Step back," Lyra murmured, but there was a note of fascination in her voice, tension mingled with awe. The desert fell silent around them except for the scraping of scales against stone, the whisper of wind across the dunes, and Ethan's controlled breathing. And for the first time since the crash, a fragile bond began to form in the heat, dust, and endless orange horizon. The apex predator no longer just a threat, but a living mirror of trust, curiosity, and the strange courage of a human who had come alone. The wind shifted, carrying fine grains of sand over Ethan Miller's shoulders as he moved cautiously along the jagged ridge, the predator following at a measured distance, its amber eyes never leaving him. He kept his hands low, the feeding tray empty now, but the gesture alone seemed to communicate patience and understanding. Lyra hovered above the slope, her posture tense yet curious, her eyes fixed on every subtle movement, tail swishing gently, as if balancing her anticipation with caution. Ethan adjusted the straps of his pack, checking the compact environmental sensor. Temperature had dropped to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity near zero, the air dry and thin, making every breath deliberate. He allowed his gaze to drift over the predator's sleek, scaled back, noting how the sunlight glinted across the ridges of its spine, highlighting the contours of powerful muscles beneath the glossy surface. Each step he took was measured, careful to maintain a rhythm, soft and consistent, echoing the predator's own movements across the uneven sand. Lyra tilted her head, golden irises narrowing slightly as she whispered, "Do you think it will follow you willingly?" Ethan glanced upward, voice calm, steady. "It already is. It is learning that I am not a threat. That is enough for now." The predator shifted, a subtle step forward, nostrils flaring slightly, the faint hiss of air through its scales punctuating the silence. Ethan allowed himself a slow exhale, counting each heartbeat to remain steady. He moved to a small outcrop ahead, the rock providing partial shelter from the gusts that carried sand like a fine mist. Setting down the tray, he crouched low, letting the predator approach freely. Its massive head lowered, eyes scanning Ethan's face, and he met the gaze, unwavering. Lyra's tail flicked again, slower this time, the tension easing in her posture. She spoke softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Humans have a strange kind of patience, a bravery that does not rely on force." Ethan tilted his head slightly, noting the predator's shifting weight, its muscles tensing and releasing in a pattern that suggested curiosity rather than fear. He reached out slowly, palm flat, a silent invitation. The predator stepped closer, sniffing the air between them, then lowered its massive shoulders slightly, a sign of tentative trust. Ethan's pulse remained even, each beat deliberate, as he let the wind carry his measured breathing, a rhythm for the predator to mimic. Lyra descended closer, hovering just above the sand, her voice a whisper. "I have watched many creatures, but never have I seen one respond with such willingness without coercion." Ethan nodded once, eyes on the predator, and murmured, "Understanding does not come from dominance. It comes from respect." The predator circled him slowly, each movement controlled, deliberate, acknowledging the human's presence without aggression. Sand shifted beneath their feet, sun dipping lower on the horizon, casting long, deep shadows across the desert floor. Ethan stood, still and calm, letting the predator adjust to his height, the space between them filled with unspoken communication, patience, and quiet confidence. Lyra's gaze softened, the golden glow in her eyes reflecting both the desert suns and a dawning respect for the human beside her. Together, the three of them stood, a triangle of trust, silent understanding. Binding them in a moment suspended between dusk and night, predator and human and observer, learning the rhythm of coexistence in a world where the unexpected had become possible. The suns dipped lower toward the horizon, casting long, shifting shadows across the desert floor as Ethan Miller adjusted his stance, keeping his gaze on the predator that now lingered mere feet away. The creature's scales shimmered with a subtle gradient of gold and copper, reflecting the fading light, its movements smooth, deliberate, and measured, a silent dialogue passing between human and apex predator. Lyra hovered slightly above the sand, her four eyes fixed on every subtle twitch of muscle and tail, her lips parting to whisper observations to herself. "It is learning his rhythm, his intent." Ethan bent slowly, keeping his palms visible and still, the faint breeze carrying a scent of sweat and sand, and he extended his hand toward the creature's massive snout, a gesture of trust and reassurance rather than command. The predator's amber eyes flicked between the hand and Ethan's face, nostrils flaring softly, exhaling a warm, earthy breath that mingled with the cool wind. Ethan's boots sank into the fine sand, 20 inches with each careful step, yet he moved without haste, attuned to the unspoken rules of this silent negotiation. Lyra shifted her position, tail swishing behind her as the wind kicked up a swirl of fine dust, and her voice softened, curiosity overtaking caution. "I have never seen such patience from a human in the presence of one of these creatures." Ethan allowed a faint nod, eyes never leaving the predator, and murmured, "It is not about dominance. It is about understanding. It will learn that I am not a threat, that my presence can coexist with its own." The predator lowered its massive head, each scale shifting smoothly over the next, and in a tentative motion, brushed its snout against Ethan's outstretched hand, an act that sent a ripple of awareness through the human. Lyra's posture eased slightly, the tension in her limbs releasing as she watched the moment unfold, golden irises reflecting the ambient light and the subtle rise and fall of Ethan's chest as he maintained steady breathing. The desert air, dry and crisp at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, carried the faint sounds of distant shifting sands and the soft hiss of scales against stone, punctuating the stillness that now defined the space between human and predator. Ethan took a cautious step back, letting the creature adjust its position, the connection neither forced nor rushed, each movement deliberate, a choreography of trust forming in the waning light. Lyra's voice, barely audible over the wind, offered a quiet acknowledgement. Perhaps humans possess a courage not born of strength but of understanding. Ethan smiled faintly, keeping his hand extended until the predator lifted its head, amber eyes locking with his. And for the first time in this vast, unforgiving desert, the apex predator's posture softened entirely, a silent acceptance passing between them. Shadows lengthened, stretching over the dunes and across the jagged outcrops, and Ethan allowed himself to stand fully upright, still maintaining that calm, controlled presence, knowing the moment of true connection had arrived, the predator now moving alongside him in a tentative, yet unmistakable partnership. Lyra hovered closer, the light from the setting suns glinting off her cyan-blue skin, and whispered, almost reverently, "You have earned its trust, Ethan Miller. It sees you, not as prey or threat, but as a companion." The wind shifted again, swirling grains of sand into the air, and Ethan exhaled slowly, the beat of his heart steady, the predator now walking beside him, their movements synchronized with a rhythm born of patience, respect, and the quiet understanding that in this alien world, trust had been earned, not demanded. The desert grew quieter as the sun sank lower, painting the sand in streaks of crimson and amber, and Ethan Miller kept his pace steady, each footstep measured against the soft shifting of the predator's enormous paws beside him. The creature moved with an unexpected grace, each stride deliberate yet effortless, muscles rippling under gleaming scales, and Ethan's eyes remained locked on its movement, noting every subtle shift in weight and balance. Lyra hovered close above the dunes, her cyan-blue skin catching the last rays of sunlight, her four eyes tracking Ethan and the predator with intense focus, noting the silent communication that passed between them. The wind carried the faint scent of desert flora mixed with the predator's earthy musk, and Ethan inhaled deeply, letting it anchor his movements, keeping his hands open and visible, gestures unthreatening yet confident. He adjusted the small sensor on his wrist, reading the temperature at 71 degrees Fahrenheit and wind speed at 40 miles per hour, the sand whipping across the dunes in fine golden sheets. Ethan crouched briefly, touching the tray where he had placed a small portion of nutrient gel, and the predator paused, sniffing the offering before stepping back slightly, allowing Ethan to retrieve it, the trust between them growing with each silent gesture. Lyra's voice was barely audible over the whispering wind, a soft murmur. "It observes, not out of fear, but out of choice," and Ethan nodded without breaking stride, replying softly, "It chooses to learn from patience, not force. That is all it needs." Shadows stretched long across the dunes, and the predator's tail swept lightly against the sand, stirring small clouds of dust, each movement measured, mirroring the calm rhythm of Ethan's breathing. The distant jagged rocks rose against the fading light, a potential shelter for the night, and Ethan led the predator toward them, careful to maintain a space that allowed both freedom and proximity, signaling safety without constraining movement. Lyra descended closer, tilting her head, eyes wide with fascination, golden irises reflecting the gradient of the setting suns, and whispered, "You have found a way to speak without words." Ethan smiled faintly, keeping his gestures minimal, extending a hand toward the rock formation as an invitation rather than a command, and the predator responded by brushing its snout lightly against his palm before settling in a cautious, yet calm stance nearby. The air cooled to 68 degrees Fahrenheit as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, and Ethan's shadow stretched long across the dunes, merging with the predator's, creating a single, cohesive form that moved in tandem across the sand. Lyra's tail flicked in quiet approval, her posture relaxed but attentive, and Ethan murmured, "We will rest here for a while. Observe, understand, and allow trust to grow." The predator shifted, lowering its head and curling its massive body slightly toward the rocks, a subtle sign of acceptance, and Ethan adjusted his pack to settle down beside it, careful not to crowd, letting the creature dictate the space they shared. The last light of the suns faded, leaving a deep, muted orange glow across the horizon, and Ethan inhaled the cool night air, listening to the soft rustle of sand and the predator's measured breathing, feeling the first tangible bond of mutual understanding solidifying in the quiet desert night. Lyra hovered a few feet above, her voice soft, reflective. Perhaps this is what humans offer that others cannot: patience, steadiness, and a willingness to exist alongside without coercion. Ethan nodded, eyes on the predator's amber gaze, and whispered, "Trust is built slowly, one step at a time, in silence and observation, and that is the strongest connection we can forge here." The desert stretched endlessly around them, cool and calm, and for the first time in days, the three of them, human, predator, and observer, shared a fragile, yet undeniable, sense of coexistence in the alien world. The night had settled over the desert, the twin moons casting a pale silver glow across the dunes, and Ethan Miller shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the predator that had now curled beside him, its massive body rising and falling with a steady rhythm. The cool air, dropping to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, carried a faint scent of mineral-rich sand and the subtle musk of the creature, a scent Ethan had learned to recognize as calm rather than aggressive. Lyra hovered nearby, just above the dunes, her cyan-blue skin reflecting the soft moonlight, her four eyes scanning the surroundings while her tail swayed in a slow, thoughtful arc. Ethan adjusted the strap of his pack, retrieving a compact water container, and slowly poured a small amount onto the tray he had left beside the predator, the water glistening under the moons before being sniffed and accepted with cautious interest. He kept his movements deliberate, maintaining a low posture, letting the predator observe without feeling crowded or threatened. Lyra's voice, soft and almost reverent, carried across the distance. "It seems your presence is no longer foreign to it. Your calm has become a signal." Ethan nodded slightly, murmuring, "Every step we take is communication, without words, without force. Trust grows in silence and patience." The predator's head lifted slightly, amber eyes reflecting both moons, and it moved a few careful steps forward, circling Ethan once before returning to settle beside him again, a subtle acknowledgement of the developing bond. Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of his breathing match the predator's, the stillness of the desert around them amplifying the quiet connection. Lyra tilted her head, golden irises gleaming, and whispered, "I have observed many attempts at interaction with these creatures, but none have succeeded without dominance. You offer something different." Ethan allowed a faint smile to touch his lips, keeping his posture steady, voice calm. "Understanding, not control. Observation, not command. It chooses to respond to that." The wind shifted slightly, carrying grains of sand across the dunes in a soft hiss, and Ethan's boots pressed into the fine particles as he adjusted his stance, allowing both predator and desert to set the pace. Shadows from the dunes stretched long beneath the moons, highlighting the contours of the terrain and the predator's glossy scales, the interplay of light revealing the strength and elegance of its form. Ethan extended a hand slowly toward the creature, open and steady, and the predator lifted its massive head, sniffed, then gently nudged the palm with its snout, a tentative but deliberate gesture that spoke of trust earned through quiet presence. Lyra hovered closer, her posture relaxed, voice soft. "Perhaps this is what humans offer that others cannot: consistency, calm, and the willingness to exist without forcing their will." Ethan remained still, letting the predator explore the space between them, watching as the creature's muscles relaxed further, tail sweeping lightly through the sand in a gentle rhythm, each movement reinforcing the silent understanding developing in the cool night air. The moon's reflection cast a soft glow over Ethan, Lyra, and the predator, creating a tableau of calm coexistence, a moment suspended in time where patience, observation, and respect formed a bridge between species. The desert remained quiet, the air crisp, and Ethan's chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths, eyes meeting the predator's amber gaze with an unspoken promise of continued trust, while Lyra observed from above, golden eyes wide with awe, understanding that this human had offered something no others had, the quiet assurance that he would not demand, only coexist, a silent companion in the vast, open alien landscape. The cool night air hung still across the desert, stars flickering above like distant lanterns, and Ethan Miller moved deliberately along the sand, letting the predator shadow his steps with an ease that had developed over hours of shared presence. Each grain of sand shifted underfoot, crunching softly in the quiet, a subtle reminder of the fragile balance of this alien environment. Lyra hovered nearby, her cyan blue skin illuminated by starlight, her eyes fixed on Ethan, watching the rhythm between him and the predator, noting the silent cues and measured movements that had built a foundation of trust. Ethan adjusted the strap of his pack, retrieving a small compact scanner, the display glowing faintly in the moonlight, showing subtle shifts in temperature and movement, evidence that the predator was acclimating to his presence in the desert night. He held the scanner low, letting the device vibrate softly, a non-threatening signal that elicited only curiosity from the predator, which leaned its massive head closer to investigate the humming pulse. Ethan whispered to himself, "Observe, do not interfere. Let it learn at its own pace." The predator responded with a slow, measured shift, muscles rippling under sleek scales, and stepped closer to Ethan without hesitation, a sign that the silent communication was working. Lyra's tail flicked lightly, her expression a mixture of awe and analytical focus, and she murmured, "It recognizes your intentions, human. Your presence is not a threat. It is an offering of understanding." Ethan allowed a faint nod, taking a slow breath to steady his heart rate, and extended a hand toward a small rock where he had left a sample of edible desert flora, letting the predator approach freely to investigate. Its amber eyes scanned the offering, nostrils flaring, then it took a cautious step forward, touching the plant lightly with its snout before stepping back, glancing at Ethan as if to gauge reaction. Ethan's chest rose and fell in a deliberate rhythm, matching the pace of the predator, each movement and gesture carefully orchestrated to maintain a non-threatening presence. Lyra moved closer, hovering just above the sand, her golden irises reflecting the faint light of the moons, and whispered, "Your patience is teaching it restraint, an awareness that it has not encountered before." Ethan kept his voice calm, steady. Respect does not demand obedience. It earns cooperation. The predator circled him slowly, tilting its head, each movement measured and intentional, exploring the limits of this new dynamic without anxiety or aggression. Ethan mirrored the motion, slow and deliberate, maintaining space and alignment, reinforcing the quiet dialogue of trust. The desert stretched endlessly around them, cool and silent, the only sounds the whisper of wind over sand and the soft rustle of predator scales across the dunes. Ethan took a careful step forward, palm extended toward the creature, and it responded by nudging his hand gently with its snout, an acknowledgement that had taken hours to earn, but now solidified in the stillness of the desert night. Lyra's gaze softened, the tension in her posture dissipating, and she whispered, "You are not just surviving here, Ethan Miller. You are creating harmony where none existed." Ethan allowed a faint smile, maintaining eye contact with the predator, the unspoken understanding between them deepening with each passing moment, the desert night embracing this fragile but undeniable bond between human, alien observer, and apex predator in a world where patience and respect had become the currency of trust. The first light of dawn began to stretch across the desert horizon, casting pale gold and soft lavender hues over the sand as Ethan Miller adjusted his stance, eyes sweeping the terrain while the predator moved silently at his side, each step deliberate and measured, its massive form gliding across the dunes without disturbing the fragile balance of sand beneath. The air was cool at 67 degrees Fahrenheit, carrying a faint mineral scent, and the low hum of wind whispered across the ripples of the desert surface, blending with the subtle rustle of the predator's scales. Lyra hovered slightly above the dunes, her cyan blue skin reflecting the early light. Golden irises scanning Ethan and the predator, noting the calm synchronization between them. Ethan knelt briefly to check the small portable scanner, confirming that no other creatures were nearby and that the temperature remained stable. Then he stood, keeping his hands open, steady, and visible, gestures slow and deliberate, signaling no threat, only continued respect and patience. The predator shifted slightly, amber eyes fixed on him, muscles moving fluidly under the shimmering scales as it stepped closer, responding to the rhythm Ethan maintained. Lyra's voice, soft yet clear over the gentle morning breeze, whispered, "It seems the predator has learned your intent, human. Your presence no longer startles, only reassures." Ethan nodded faintly, replying quietly, "Trust is not forced. It is offered and accepted at its own pace." The predator circled slowly, head low, nostrils flaring as it examined the human and the sparse vegetation scattered across the dune, and Ethan followed the movement with mirrored precision, letting the creature's pace guide his own. Shadows from the distant outcroppings stretched long, contrasting with the light of the rising suns, creating a patchwork of illumination across the desert floor, highlighting the sleek contours of the predator's form and the careful, controlled movements of Ethan. Lyra tilted her head, observing the interaction, tail swaying in thoughtful arcs, and murmured, "This is learning beyond instinct. It is understanding." Conveyed without words. Ethan extended a hand slowly toward a small patch of desert flowers, leaving them on the sand as a gesture, not a test, and the predator approached, sniffing carefully, stepping around the fragile blossoms while keeping close to Ethan. The moment stretched, filled only with the ambient sound of wind and sand, the predator's soft breathing, and the quiet confidence of a human who had learned to move with patience rather than urgency. Lyra hovered closer, whispering, "The human teaches what others cannot: patience, calm, and the ability to coexist without demand." Ethan allowed a faint smile, keeping his eyes on the predator, and said softly, "It is not force that builds trust, but consistency and respect." The predator lowered its head slightly, brushing against Ethan's side as if to affirm the connection, and together they moved along the dune, a silent triad of observer, human, and apex creature, sharing the rhythm of a new day in an alien landscape. Each learning from the other, the fragile bond strengthened with every careful, deliberate step across the sunlit sand. The sun had climbed higher, casting sharp, golden light across the desert dunes, and Ethan Miller moved steadily, the predator walking beside him with a calm yet attentive gait, its amber eyes constantly tracking his movements. The sand beneath their feet shifted softly, each step leaving a fleeting impression that the wind would erase, yet in that moment it marked the rhythm of their companionship. Lyra hovered above, cyan blue skin glowing faintly in the morning light, her golden irises reflecting both the human and the creature, observing the silent communication that had grown stronger with each hour. Ethan reached for his compact scanner, noting the rising temperature at 83 degrees Fahrenheit, wind gusts at 20 miles per hour, and stable humidity, then stored it carefully, knowing the environment was safe for the predator to move freely. He extended a hand toward a cluster of desert flowers, not as bait, but as an invitation to explore, and the predator stepped forward cautiously, sniffing the delicate blooms before nudging Ethan's palm gently, a gesture of recognition and trust. Lyra's voice, soft and reflective, carried over the dunes. "It has accepted you fully, Ethan. It observes without fear, it responds without hesitation, and it seems to understand your intent." Ethan kept his eyes on the predator, voice low and steady. "Understanding is earned, never forced. Every movement, every breath, every gesture communicates more than words ever could." The predator circled slowly, tail sweeping lightly across the sand, muscles flexing smoothly, demonstrating awareness and attentiveness, its gaze never leaving Ethan's face, measuring intent and patience. The wind carried a faint scent of minerals and the subtle earthy aroma of the predator, mingling in the air as the trio moved forward, shadows stretching long across the dunes, emphasizing the contours of the landscape and the sleek form of the creature. Ethan crouched briefly to check the remaining water supply, then straightened, extending both hands open in a gesture of reassurance, allowing the predator to approach on its own terms, stepping carefully between each dune and rock outcropping. Lyra hovered closer, tail swaying gently, whispering. The human demonstrates what others cannot: calm persistence, observation, and the capacity to coexist with a creature that would otherwise remain untamed. Ethan nodded faintly, a smile touching his lips. It is not about commanding or controlling. It is about presence, patience, and respect. Trust grows in those spaces. The predator lowered its head once more, brushing against Ethan's side as if to affirm the bond, then stepped alongside him, matching pace naturally, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, the wind softening with the rising sun, and Ethan inhaled the warm, dry air, listening to the subtle sounds of shifting sand and the gentle exhalations of the predator, knowing that the connection they had built was solid, a rare harmony formed in the vast alien landscape. Lyra hovered a few feet higher, voice soft, awe threaded through her words. You have done what no other human has, Ethan Miller. You have earned its confidence, and in doing so, you have shown a way forward for coexistence in this world. Ethan kept his gaze steady on the predator, amber eyes meeting his, and whispered, Trust is not given lightly, but once accepted, it can form the strongest bond in the galaxy. Together, the three of them moved through the dunes, human, predator, and observer, each step reinforcing the quiet alliance, the rhythm of patience, respect, and understanding, creating a connection that neither time nor distance could break. The desert now glowed in the soft light of mid-morning, the twin suns rising higher, scattering gold and pale amber across the dunes, and Ethan Miller walked steadily with the predator moving calmly at his side, every step synchronized, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed over countless hours. The sand underfoot shifted gently, grains sparkling in the sunlight, the warmth rising slowly to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and a light breeze carried the faint scent of mineral dust and the earthy aroma of the predator. Lyra hovered slightly above the dunes, her cyan blue skin catching the sunlight, her golden irises following every subtle movement, noting how the predator responded without hesitation to Ethan's gestures, and how the human maintained a calm, deliberate presence. Ethan adjusted the strap of his pack and retrieved a small water container, pouring a measured amount into the feeding tray, allowing the predator to approach freely. It sniffed, stepped carefully, and drank, amber eyes flicking to Ethan with a quiet, measured trust. The desert seemed vast and endless, the ripples of sand and jagged rocks creating a landscape that could overwhelm any being. Yet the predator moved alongside Ethan as if guided by understanding rather than fear. Lyra whispered, almost reverently, You have done what no other human has. You exist alongside it, not above it, not controlling, only coexisting. Ethan murmured softly, voice steady. Coexistence is earned through patience, observation, and respect. Force is never required for understanding. The predator shifted, brushing lightly against Ethan's leg with its massive head, a gentle acknowledgement of trust and recognition, then circled slowly, keeping a careful but confident proximity. Shadows stretched long across the sand, highlighting the contours of the dunes and the predator's sleek form, and Ethan walked with deliberate steps, allowing the creature to set the rhythm, each movement reinforcing the silent dialogue that had taken hours to develop. Lyra's tail flicked softly as she hovered closer, whispering, It has accepted the human presence entirely. It no longer moves with caution, only awareness, a rare harmony between two very different species. Ethan's hand hovered over the tray, palm open, a gesture of reassurance rather than command, and the predator stepped forward, nudging his hand lightly with its snout, eyes locked on his with steady, measured attention. The desert was quiet except for the soft rush of wind over sand and the gentle rustle of scales moving across dunes, the scene illuminated by sunlight filtering over jagged rocks and shifting sand, a tableau of trust forged over hours of silent communication. Ethan exhaled slowly, heart steady, letting the rhythm of his breathing match the predator's, each rise and fall of the chest a reminder of patience rewarded, and Lyra's gaze softened, golden eyes reflecting both suns, and the subtle movements of two beings that had found understanding without words. The predator followed Ethan as he navigated the dunes, each careful step reinforcing the trust that had grown steadily, the bond now unbreakable in the harsh alien landscape. Ethan glanced at Lyra, who hovered just above, and whispered quietly, "This is what humanity can offer: presence without demand, patience without expectation, and the understanding that trust is stronger than any instinct for fear." The predator's amber eyes remained on him, calm and attentive, and together, human, predator, and observer moved forward across the desert, the sands warm beneath their feet, the sunlight bright on their forms, and a quiet, enduring connection held them together, a testament to understanding, coexistence, and the quiet strength of a human who had proven that respect and patience could tame the untamable in a world of endless possibilities.